My name is Jack Miner. I'm the Chief Investment Officer with TEDCO in Maryland, and I'm delighted to have Dr. Levi Thompson joining me. Dean Thompson is at the University of Delaware, and he and I had a chance to work together a long time ago at the University of Michigan. This is a chance just to check in. Haven't talked to you in probably 5 years, and looking forward to finding out more about what's going on. So, Levi, thanks very much for joining me. I appreciate it. Oh,
my pleasure, Jack. And it's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well.
I believe it's been 5 years or more.
At least, yeah. Yeah, lots has happened. A couple things between last time I saw you. So I think the most, probably the biggest thing from my standpoint anyway, is that you're now at University of Delaware, Dean of Engineering. Tell me about that. Tell me about the program and what's exciting there.
So lots of excitement. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate. A great opportunity for us to tell the University of Delaware story. And, in some regards, we think about how we can impact sort of economic development quite a bit here. Engineers, as you probably know, are problem solvers. And, we have a particular focus on that. Here at the University of Delaware, we're a community of about 4,000 faculty, students, and staff. Again, our focus has been to try and impact, one, I would say, the workforce. We're graduating excellent students. We like to think of them as career-ready or business-ready engineers. And what that means is they not only have the technical skills that are required to be effective in their jobs, but they also have the other, some might call them durable or soft skills. These are things like being able to communicate. I was talking to one of our alumni who is a CEO, and he said a lot of engineers typically come in and they're not able to communicate. They have great ideas, but they can't communicate them. And so, that idea is technically or kind of lost in translation. Hate to use that term, but lost in translation. And so we try to help them understand how to be effective in their communications, which has been not only useful for them, but it's been a lot of fun. It helps us see what it really takes to be an effective engineer in the workforce. And I mentioned economic development. That's something that carries over a little bit from my experience at the University of Michigan. Began to understand how important universities and Research One universities can be to the community and, actually to the nation and the world, in fact. And so we want to do our part here at the University of Delaware. We've had a focus on educating our students to be a little more innovative, to think about how you solve real problems. We spin off companies. Maybe when the time is right, I'll tell you a little bit more about that as well. And then the last thing I would tell you is, and I know it's been a little long, but we have a focus on generating new knowledge. That's what educational institutions do. It's interesting. You don't know exactly when it'll be useful. We dig back into the archives and we find all kinds of information, useful information that's relevant for today. And so we want to be part of that inventory of great ideas that maybe are not ready for prime time today, but could be in the future.
Yeah. I want to start kind of where you started as well with workforce development. I think that universities are under a tremendous amount of pressure to demonstrate the value their education. And I think that, getting, I don't know, when I graduated was like, you were book smart, but like you said, couldn't articulate the reason why you think it's a good idea. I guess I see less of that, but I see more of the concern around, I have this degree, but I don't use my degree when I graduate, or when I use my degree, how do I actually excel? And so workforce development being a lot of career development, you're not going to be vice president of the company within 18 months of graduation. I mean, there's there's things like that that go into that. So what are some of the things that you've done around this? Have you worked on the communication with engineers, which probably inappropriately, what's the old joke of what do you call an extroverted engineer? Somebody who looks at somebody else's shoes at a cocktail party instead of their own. So how do you kind of bring people out of their shell and communicate?
Well, I mean, the reality is engineers are just like everybody else. I think there's been this typecasting, if you will. We have similar interests to others. Maybe our technical interests are focused around engineering, but the other things that we do, we have I play basketball. I have a daughter who's an artist. I have another daughter who's a runner and does marathons, things like that. So I don't think, maybe what I'm saying is, this typecasting that we have for engineers is not necessarily true. But when I talked about getting students ready for careers, I've heard from some of our alumni and recruiters that after they graduate, they have to be trained, not necessarily in the technical areas, but there are some other skills that they will need. How do you write an effective memo? I had one of our alumni, it was kind of interesting. He said that there used to being, and I want to get this right, it's sort of along the lines, there used to being the boss, if you will, or in charge of things, and you go into the workforce and you now have a boss. You're no longer in charge of the many things that you thought you were. And how do you adjust to that kind of climate? We want to make sure that our students are ready for that. And part of it is just having people come back, having our recruiters share with us what really makes a difference. And we listen. One of the things that you'll find here at the University of Delaware in general, but in particular in our college, is that we listen. We try to shape our programs to the extent we can around the needs of the workforce.
Yeah. I think that's so important. And you're right. I think that it's, having those role models come back and talk about, what it is that they've done. And let's segue that into the innovation and startup world. Having somebody who graduated from Delaware and came back and is talking about a startup that they developed. I've got to think that's pretty impactful as well to have those individuals tell their story.
Absolutely.
And have you been able to tell your own story in terms of your startup experience and what you've done with that?
So I have told my story, but more importantly, I have a sense of what we need. If you look, when I walked in the door, you can actually see some areas where we could improve. And so we've worked very hard to do that. One of the things that I've come to learn is that you need an experienced set of personnel, people that are working around the concept. The concept, let's say that it's a useful concept. The people will allow that concept to grow and ultimately to be translated out. And, there's this thought that, and I'll shape this around having the right kind of ecosystem that will allow for those ideas that we generate to be very efficiently maybe pulled out or extracted out or decanted, whatever term you want to use, but you pull those out into the spaces where they might have some use. We talk a lot about trying to ensure that we get some of our alumni to come back who are entrepreneurs. We even talked about having some of our students go out to the West Coast. We have a pretty significant density of entrepreneurs and venture capital people out on the West Coast, and we're trying to connect the two. Delaware is a beautiful place. The California in some ways is a little more beautiful. So rather than having them always come here, we're thinking we'd have them go out to the West Coast and just see what it's like, explore the various opportunities that might be available.
Yeah. Well, Delaware, as you know better than I do, although Maryland kind of shares this, a small but mighty state.
Hmm.
And if I remember correctly, a startup I worked with many years ago, we worked with Roman Haas, with DuPont and Dow. There was a big chemical processing, really high tech corridor there in Delaware. Did they connect with the university very much? Is there a significant public-private partnership type of relationship?
Absolutely. So one I would point to, and there are others that I could use as examples, but we have a part of our campus, we call it the Star Campus. It's where, we envision most of the public-private partnerships will not only grow but thrive. They'll be initiated and thrive there. And so one example I would use is Comores. They have their research hub on the Star campus. They lease a space from the university. They put up, I think it's a 300,000 square foot facility there. And what does that allow us to do? Well, we've always had great relationships with Comores, DuPont, the companies that are in the area. But having them on campus or very close to our campus has made a real difference. I probably have a conversation once a week with someone from Comores about ideas that we want to move forward. We have worked on, our most recent one was a hydrogen initiative that, hopefully in the next couple of months, you'll hear a lot more about it. It's pretty significant investment in driving hydrogen, which is part of the portfolio of technologies that Comores is interested in. The University of Delaware has great strength. We've partnered with a couple other companies to try and advance hydrogen as an alternative to fossil fuels. And that's the benefit of kind of creating that ecosystem and having people be drawn to the University of Delaware. And we had the facilities, we had the space, and it just made sense to use that as a way of bridging their company and the University of Delaware.
When you talk with them and when you look at those emerging technologies, and firsthand, there's the time, talent, treasure issue of starting up a company. Mm-hmm. What do you see as the biggest challenge? Is it talent or early stage funding? What are the biggest issues that you see?
I mean, I think the root of it is talent. If you find the right people, they'll attract the money. Mm-hmm. And that's all assuming that you have a viable concept. But very often you'll have a viable concept, the wrong people trying to drive it. You end up not realizing the full potential of that opportunity. And so, in my limited experience, I would say it's about the people. It's about how you staff up, and that's from the very start. Who is going to be the chief, if you will, providing overall guidance, and that person ought to understand what their limitations are. When I think back to our startup, TJ Technologies, coming out of the box, we were significantly funded with government grants through the SBIR program, the STTR program as examples. But you realize that those are not going to get you to a product. They'll help launch things. You can often do proof of concept, get it close to what might look like a pilot or a prototype. But most of the things that we worked on required significant investments, and having someone that can market the concept to the right people makes a huge difference. And if you think about private equity, you're going to have the right person there. Yeah. Describing, pitching your concept. Even for contracts, we had a number of significant government contracts. You got to have the right people creating the documents that are required for the opportunity, being able to share how it solves a real problem, not the one that we envision from an academic perspective, but someone's real problem. And once you identify those, some very good things can happen.
Yeah. So if we kind of put a bow on a few different things, workforce development, COVID, and the early stage company need for talent. What did we learn in COVID? Even at a university, in undergrad, what did we learn that can translate into the workforce?
I would tell you one thing is that we've not spent enough time thinking about mental health. That has been something that, unfortunately we missed. There was some focus, but certainly not enough. It revealed a lot of chinks in the armor, if you will. And so we've spent a lot of time thinking about not only the health and welfare, mental health of our students, but also our staff and our faculty. I was maybe not surprised, but what COVID revealed is that very like this interruption can create huge ripple effects. It's not only perhaps your ability to teach a class. If we have to pivot to remote, you'll have to now sit in front of a camera, deliver and I'm speaking from a faculty perspective, deliver your lecture materials. But that also is a very different way of teaching that some are not really comfortable with. They engage with their students in ways that really are, from their perspective, is a requirement. And didn't really think about that. We thought that remote would be just like teaching in person, but it's not. And then for the students, they benefit from having someone in the classroom, someone that you can ask. Well, so remotely you can ask questions, but signs that you'll see, and maybe we'll call that body language, just some indications that students are either getting it or not getting it. And those are important in teaching and learning, for those students who are in that classroom. And then, I think about our staff. This, in the last few months, we've talked a lot about this. There was, for those who are not student facing per se, they don't have a need to meet with students every day. Why not let them stay home? We're now beginning to understand that the system, in some regards, requires or needs everyone to be around. Even if you're not student facing, your colleague needs you to be there or wants you to be there, because they're much more effective when there's sort of the community is intact. And so we're trying to figure out how it's a tough, very difficult issue to deal with, but how do you ensure that those who need that engagement can get it, but those who would prefer to be remote most of the time, if not all of the time, how do you get those two together so that your organization can function most effectively? And that's, again, we don't have the answer yet, but we're an academic institution. So one of the things we kind of thrive on is running experiments, testing hypotheses, trying to see what might work. And so from that perspective, it's kind of exciting to see where we'll end up.
Yeah, so insightful relative to faculty mental health. I guess I really didn't think about it that much. So much has been about student mental health and what they're going through as students, and the fact that you do go to a four-year institution for the social aspect of it, and not being able to do that's a real challenge. But I didn't think about faculty who, literally overnight had to go from maybe 20 years of teaching in person with handouts to, now I've got to be on screen, and what that would do to me mentally. I never thought of it. That's a really insightful point.
Well, and we hear this from other people, but think about the cues, the nonverbal cues that very often in 2 dimensions, you can't kind of get it, but in 3 dimensions, it's a little more obvious. Those kinds of cues, some people thrive on that. you know, the content of your lecture won't change significantly, but maybe the direction that you take it, the speed that you walk through the material might change. And I can tell you it's hard, it's kind of hard to describe, but you can sense when students aren't getting it. It's more difficult, much more difficult when we're remote.
Especially screens off, you know, if my camera's off, you can't tell at all.
Exactly.
You know?
The other thing I would tell you is that, you know, many of our junior faculty have children.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're worried about, you know, their education, getting them. I mean, it used to be that, well, you get them to school and then you didn't forget about them, but, you know, they were pretty much taken care of. Now there's that window where they're still close. You're thinking about them, trying to figure out how to make it work for everybody. You know, that can be taxing. And you know, we're trying to do the best we can. We can certainly do more, but you know, that's something that we think about quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm sure you're like me. You know, when your daughters were young and my son and daughter were young, man, I would have given anything to have breakfast with them every morning. You know, and then go to work and be able to see them at lunchtime when they were little kids. And you know, some of the guys on my team have that ability to you know, basically wake up with their family, switch to screen, work for 8 hours, switch back, and not have to be in traffic that whole time. And I try to put myself in their shoes and be like, I would have given anything to have that, you know, when they were young. So you've got that blend. You've got that blend of people who really want to have that social interaction, need that. I do. You know, I need to be around people. I probably pick up on more, maybe to a fault, pick up on more of the nonverbal cues and think, you know, what I say wrong. But I need that. Otherwise, I think, you know, about what's going on. You know, I think just before we leave the mental health issue as well, you may recall our friend Mahendra Ramsingani wrote a book about mental health in startups for entrepreneurs. I'm going to have him on a podcast here in the next month or so. I'm really looking forward to talking to him about that. And, you know, it's we have to talk about it. I mean, that, absolutely, you know, if nothing else, we just put it out there. And so I appreciate your bringing that up. It's an important point.
So, in some regards, it's that elephant in the room. I mean, it's sitting there, and I mean, one of our challenges is that we're not sure how to deal with it. You know, we don't know exactly what's best. That for some is an uncomfortable place to be. But I would tell you, and this is, you know, I'm not sure how viewers will receive this, but you know, one of the wonderful things about being at an academic institution is that we're more comfortable with risk, more comfortable with maybe not knowing and trying a few things. We do a lot of due diligence to make sure we've come to what is perhaps the best option, but we're really quite comfortable with taking risk. You know, trying to identify those things that will really make a difference in a sea of uncertainty.
Yeah. Well, it's maybe a double-edged sword. The good news is nobody else has figured it out yet. Bad news is nobody else has figured it out yet. I think but that's what I love about those kinds of problems, is that they are big and pervasive. And, you know, if we can sort that out as together, it'll be a great day. So, you know, when we talk about the biggest challenges for startups, we're talking about the battle for talent for an early stage company, how to get those talented individuals there. When you look back at TJ Technologies and the successes that you had, I'll let you pick one or two, you know, biggest success, biggest failure, biggest lesson. You know, what's kind of the biggest thing that you took away from TJ Technologies as the company grew and was sold?
Well, again, I would go back to the people. And I think if you were to consider the success of TJ Technologies, it had a lot to do with the people that we, not only that we started with, but sort of what we ended with. So out of the box, my wife and I, Maria Thompson and I were kind of working on this. I decided to bring in a good friend of mine, Mike Wixom. I think you might know Mike. I know you know Maria.
Yeah.
In any case, that was really the core at the beginning. Mike Wixom, PhD in chemistry, very innovative, thoughtful. And I don't know if Mike would agree with this, but he's an excellent communicator. Maria is an outstanding marketer. She has a great sense with regard to how you address the needs of the market. And so you bring that talent together, the ability to think about solving problems or concepts that might solve a problem with someone who can articulate how that concept solves someone's problem and identifying what those problems are. That's a powerful combination. And then, the other thing I would tell you is from an operations perspective, you can bring a grant or contract or whatever you might, even private equity, you bring those resources in. People expect something in return for a grant. It's usually the knowledge. Are you advancing the knowledge? And I'm thinking in particular about maybe an NSF SBIR contract. You're advancing the concept to the point where it might look like it has some commercial viability. If you have a contract, typically those are deliverables. There are parts, pieces that they're looking for you to provide at some time during the contract or maybe at the end of the contract. And then for private equity, they want that return on investment. So you've got to be able to articulate all of that, have the concept, articulate how you'll deliver, but then do the work. You have to have somebody that's really good at operations. And so we were fortunate to bring in early on two people that I would say help really advance things. Les Alexander, who, as it turns out, I grew up with, and then Leah Wong, who is just outstanding on, he narrows things down and then gets you to the point where you're sort of driving the technology and the concept and the prototypes and whatever that were needed to try and really commercialize the technology. So I think that was the team.
Yeah.
Without that team, without those people, I'm not sure TJ would have been as successful as it was. And that success, I'm not sure you knew all of the backstory, but we ended up being acquired by A123, right, and sort of a cash in stock. So the stock tied us very closely to their success. A123, what we brought to them was a key part of what they were able to articulate as a solution for energy storage, in particular for portable electronics and vehicles of all sorts. It could be a car that you or I might drive, or an SUV. It could be a military vehicle. So there were a lot of applications for the materials and the other concepts that we had developed at TJ. And so when they acquired us, we were anxious, thinking, this is going to be big. Well, it ended up being a lot bigger than I envisioned. When A123 ultimately went public, Maria and I were able to be at the opening ceremony, which was outstanding, a wonderful experience for us. But it also helped you
at the NASDAQ, Levi?
It was.
Awesome.
So,
yeah.
We have pictures of ourselves on the big billboard out on Times Square.
Oh, very cool.
Near Times Square. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. But what it taught me, at least, is that, and this is an old saying, you can own all of nothing, something that has very little value, or you can, people talk about it in a negative sense. You get diluted a little bit. You give up some stake in the company to allow for it to really grow, bring in the right talent, bring in the other resources that are necessary. But then you end up with a small part of something that could be really large. They're,
Yeah.
These IPOs are billion-dollar events, and having a small percentage of that is transformative.
If I remember correctly, as well, A123 went through some real turmoil. I don't know if that was when your stock was locked up with them or not, but
No,
that
it
must have.
wasn't. Fortunately.
Okay. Yeah,
I'll smile on that one. I mean, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it was, but either way, it was a very, that was, that was not a straight line, for TJ Tech, right? I mean, technologies, that took a while to get.
It did.
Lots of patience on your part.
Yeah, I mentioned there are concepts that are not necessarily ready for prime time, and they go into your inventory or your archive. Yeah. I would say some of the things that we developed at TJ were not necessarily ready. And as time went on, you kind of allow for that technology or those concepts to evolve, work on a little bit. That's where those grants and contracts come in. They allow you to continue to develop it, improve characteristics, improve manufacturability. Sometimes you have this wonderful material. If it's not manufacturable, you have a problem. So we were able to identify ways to manufacture and even develop some early partnerships to try and manufacture the material. Ultimately, that put us in a great position when someone was ready for what we had to offer. And the timing, who knows? I would suggest that we were deliberate about it, and we were, but there's some serendipity involved. The timing from A123's perspective coincided well with the timing with regard to our development to the concept. And so those two matched up, it was like I won't call it a perfect marriage, but a very, very good one. And the result was good for all of us. As you indicated, A123 has had some trouble. But they even then,
it was a straight line. Right? Nothing's a straight line. And I think, that was one of the things that was interesting when we were working together at University of Michigan, where you talked about, energy storage. And, you'd think it's just a fetcher valve, right? You're just making things, right? But it's such a complicated, with the chemical part and the mechanical part and this, the advanced materials, all of that comes together. And I think either you or Seaman said to me, it's like the worst of everything. It's like a medical, therapeutic drug. It's like a medical device. It's all regulated on top of everything else. And I think people underestimate what goes into energy storage and the complicating factors. And I mean, not everybody, but people driving electronic vehicles, the EVs and Teslas. Man, there's a lot of science that goes into that. It's amazing.
I mean, one way to think about it, and maybe this is oversimplifying things, but just imagine you have this great recipe and you don't put enough of something in, or that ingredient is, and I'll say contaminated. It won't, if it was a food product, it probably isn't something that'll kill you, but it's not exactly what you expected. Your product then looks different. It tastes different. It's not as, it's not necessarily what your consumer was looking for. In a similar way, you have to make sure that that material is essentially the same every batch of it. And that's a lot harder than most people would imagine. Just imagine making that cake over and over again, where, my mother had this baked macaroni and cheese recipe. The best baked macaroni and cheese you'll ever eat.
Yeah.
Unless you had the early versions that I tried to cook, my wife tried to cook. Fortunately, with time, we got it to the point where we understood. And, it's interesting. There's some, the patent will describe pretty much the the basics, but then there are always these, this extra know-how that can often make the difference between something that is, just viable or something that's really quite outstanding. And so, and thinking about this big macaroni and cheese analogy, not enough salt in the water when you boil a macaroni. You don't put in the right amount of butter, or you have the wrong kind of cheese. We wanted to use another kind of sharp cheese, and
you're making me hungry.
Super sharp. Yeah, well, so it's what time it is. Well, for you, it might almost be lunchtime, right?
Yeah, we're in the same time zone, but
I know, but I thought you ate lunch at 11.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, so it's time for dinner at about, I go and eat with all the early bird special there.
Good.
I like that analogy a lot. I think in my own mind, I'm thinking through the recipes that I messed up by, changing it up a little bit, thinking that I was smarter than the original chef.
Yeah.
But do you get much time to work in the lab now that you're dean? Is that really? Yeah.
So I have to live through other people. I have, one person in particular that I'm working with, and it's hard because I miss that. I don't necessarily think I'm that good an experimentalist, but I like being in that. I talked about an ecosystem where you're trying to commercialize something. Well, there's also an ecosystem for innovation.
Right.
Being in the lab, being around your students, around postdocs and research engineers, something comes up. Well, why don't we try this? And that's the benefit of being there. I talked earlier about being in person. Some things that you wouldn't even think of if you're online. If we're doing this remotely, if we're all in the lab, and I'm not working, so they don't. My students hardly ever allow me to actually do an experiment. But if you're standing there and you're watching, have you thought about this? Trying it this way. And every so often you'd come up with something useful. And then more importantly, after we have data and you can start to look at it and try to connect what how we ran the experiment with the results from that experiment. And then trying to figure out, well, what can we do to enhance the properties of that material, or make it more efficient, the process itself more efficient. That's when that ecosystem really is quite important.
What are you, so without tipping your hand on any intellectual property, what are either areas or interesting technologies that you're seeing coming out of University of Delaware?
So, at the university level, I'll mention one initiative, and then I want to talk about another that's maybe closer to my heart. One initiative that we have, we're nominally calling it engineering-driven health. And the thought is that there are a lot of really important concepts that need an engineer to actually become a technology, going through that, valley of death, however you might want to characterize it, but there's that gap. And so this institute's going to focus on trying to help us advance some of those concepts. Not everyone, and it doesn't necessarily have to be all from the University of Delaware, but initially it will be mostly University of Delaware concepts, but we'll move those through, try to get them to, say, clinical stages that will then ultimately allow us to go and talk to someone about commercializing the technology. But there are a lot of areas that you might consider. The University of Delaware has been a powerhouse in the health and healthcare arena. In fact, we're in an area, this area around Philadelphia, some have called the Silicon Valley of healthcare. And so taking advantage of that, we're going to try and focus on trying to advance key technologies. The one that we're initially looking at is around mobility and rehabilitation. You may not know this, but the University of Delaware has the #1 physical therapy program in the country.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. We also have a long history of excellence in rehabilitation and advancing mobility. And so taking advantage of that, this institute will help drive new technologies that can be used to help improve the lives of everyone. You know, I think about my own mobility.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be nice to have
adding up.
Yeah, it is adding up.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Are you still playing basketball?
Video.
Oh, okay. Less injuries.
I've given up on basketball. Yeah. It took its toll when I was playing, and I enjoyed it, but you know, I like golf a little more now.
Yeah.
You know, so I spend more time thinking and playing golf than I do basketball. I watch a lot of basketball. Yeah. How about you? I know
I try to ride my bike. I don't know if I think I was riding my bike when I was at Michigan. And try to spend a lot of time on that. But you know, instead of golf, I'd rather spend 4 hours on a bike. You know, but I want to get back. Sorry, because I want to give you an opportunity to talk about something near and dear to your heart, unless it was the physical therapy program, which that's very cool. But I don't know if there's a different program that you were alluding to earlier on.
So what I was alluding to is another element of energy storage.
Okay.
So, you know, we're kind of focused on batteries. That will be the initial electrification of our vehicles, as an example, and the ability to have something that is handheld, you know, requires that you have energy storage. Otherwise, you'd have to be plugged in. As we think about the next generation, we're going to have longer range. We're going to have sort of better performance in terms of cost. And so one of the things I'm excited about is fuel cells. And it's an old area, old technology. In fact, it was the first fuel cell, I think, was demonstrated and published in like 1843, in the 1840s. So it's been around for quite some time. But now that we've become comfortable with electrification of a vehicle, I think that, you know, in the next decade or so, we'll probably see greater emphasis on transitioning to fuel cells, in particular for vehicles. That will allow you to put the fuel in, and you'll have a converter, that fuel cell, and you can change the range depending on the size of that tank, just like you do with vehicles today. So it requires a lot of work, though. You know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
It goes back to the recipe and getting the timing right and everything else.
You know, trying to get the cost right, and you know, just getting people comfortable with the thought that you might have an alternative fuel on your vehicle. I think people are starting to come around to that, but we haven't done enough to ensure that. So that's an area that I have kind of renewed excitement about, you know, especially given the escalation of electrification of vehicles.
Yeah. Timing's perfect on that. Well, look, we're running out of time, but I do want to, I guess, comment on. Maybe you only work at universities where there's a winged helmet. Doesn't the game hen, isn't that right? It's the same helmet as the University of Michigan. And what I want to know is, did the University of Michigan copy them, or the other way around?
So I will say that the designs are very similar, you know, slightly different colors. And I didn't come here necessarily because of the helmets, but it helps a little bit. I didn't have to change, you know, in fact, I didn't have to change my wardrobe at all.
That's right.
You know, I still had
maize and blue ties, but they're
blue and yellow.
Blue and yellow.
Yeah. So very, very similar. So that you know, to be honest with you, I'm not going to weigh in on who started it. You know, I have an allegiance to both institutions, to both the University of Delaware and the University of Michigan. I started my academic career at the University of Michigan. I'm going to likely end it here at the University of Delaware. I've only gone to two schools. That's the University of Delaware and the University of Michigan. So I'll leave you to do some due diligence.
Yeah. Well, all I know is the lore of fielding H. Yost, but I don't know if any of that's true. But anyway,
I think some of it is. The question is how much. There's like everything else. There's a lot of hype.
Yes,
some extra,
especially in college football. Right.
Well, and it's kind of interesting with consolidation. I still have Michigan football tickets, so a little bit excited about some of the news that I heard this weekend. Yeah,
that will be interesting. It will be. I give me some sleepless nights though, trying to watch football on Pacific time, I think. But
they get used to it. We watch basketball and professional football and baseball. So
very true. But
and a lot of it's streamed.
Yeah. And that's the only moneymaker I think for television is live sports, because it's the only thing that you can watch later, but somebody will tell you the score before you get a chance to see it. So
that's right.
But look, thanks so much for your time. We'll get together. We've got to be no more than 3 hours apart from each other.
I think it's a lot less than that.
Yeah, they're small but mighty states. So
you can ride your bike up here.
I could. I would be tired. You'd have to buy me more than coffee when I got there. But anyway,
we might keep you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was great catching up with you. Absolutely. And thank you for joining me for TEDCO Venture Talks.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
You too.